Hi people, it's Mikefield here and welcome to my Varus guide. This guide will focus on this very particular Varus build, Caster Varus. So I'll discuss in short those 8 points. So I'll mention why Varus is strong right now, I'll say what 3 main Varus builds are. I'll try to argue that Caster Varus, the build I'm talking about in this guide, is the strongest one. Then I'll show the build in detail, discuss its pros and cons, and then we'll quickly go through those 3 game phases. And this will basically wrap up the entire guide. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is what made Varus actually really strong, what made Varus noticed, because apparently he has been strong for a while. So this change happened in 6.24, so the start of the season patch, where they basically increased the bonuses to Varus's passive. You can see right here that it's plus 50% bonus attack speed on champion kill and assist, which means that this is an added value basically, which wasn't actually around in the past. Moreover, they also increased the duration for Varus passive, which he receives from minion kills. So they shortened the one from champion kills, but they did actually improve the values on the minion kill ones. This actually means that Varus's lane phase went from mediocre or even weak-ish to actually really strong. Because this bonus attack speed is quite a significant thing. I think it's like 20% or 25% right on the first level. So you do gain a really nice advantage over your opponent. You get a few extra auto attacks in the trades, and this actually makes you a decent laner, to say the least. So this is the change which propelled Varus towards the position he has right now. So the second super important change that was made, that made Varus really strong, is Lethality Upgrade, which basically made the Caster Varus the most viable build of them all. Because even though Lethality was something you would build in the past, right now, in 7.2 you get 60% of its value rather than 40, which means that you get a lot of, this armor penetration upright, rather than you having wait for it to scale up with the enemy champion level, which is actually really huge, and this does add up to why Varus is such a strong champion right now. Right, so let's go through the builds, and there are basically 3 of them. The first one focuses around the attack speed component of Varus's kit, so the passive. You start with Blade of the Ruined King, which propels your attack speed, so you basically just keep getting those huge bonuses to the speed with which you attack, right? Then you go for Hurricane, which does spread your passive, but also further increases your attack speed. Then the natural transition is the Infinity Edge. At this breakpoint between Infinity Edge and Hurricane, you're going to actually be kind of weak because you do not really have that much critical chance to impact the fights, and you don't scale that quickly. So between this Hurricane and Infinity Edge, that's going to be your weak point in the game. And then you basically just transition to whatever you need. After Infinity Edge, you're actually very strong. You poke well, you deal nice damage in team fights. Your mana sustain is a bit lacking, but that's just something you need to consider, right? You need to think about using your mana all the time. And from those 3 items, you transition to what you need, right? So either of the Last Whispers. Sometimes you will want to stick Executioner's Calling earlier into the build, when the enemy has a Soraka or a Mundo, or something that does regenerate health very quickly, right? Sona perhaps. Zac as well. Like, depends on which champions they have that are actually really strong. You might want to go for Executioner's Calling. Now, the rest of the build is basically the same for both builds. So you choose between those items that you can see. So you may go for Mercurial Scimitar with QSS if they have a lot of CC. You may want to go for Bloodthirster because that's just overall a good item. You may want to get a very early Last Whisper if they have a strong tank. You just have to adjust to the game, right? But basically, this is the core, right? The first 3 items. The second build includes Essence Reaver in the first place, which is actually a really good item because it gives you CDR, so you poke really well. So as far as poke goes, this build is much stronger than the first one, but it loses some of the utility that the passive provides. Right, so then you transition into Hurricane, so you're very strong with those 2 items. Then Infinity Edge, which means that you actually hit like a truck. And then you just choose, right? Normally it's going to be Last Whisper, I think, because tanks are very strong. There are quite a few tanks being played, so normally you'll want to go for Last Whisper 4th. Maybe even upgrade it if, if they have a very strong front line overall. Or, well, sometimes you also can go for Last Whisper when they have an Ezreal who is building the Gauntlet. Some of the champions just require it very early on. And from that point, you just build the regular way, right? So, again, you make those choices from the rest of the build path right here. Okay, now to the main part of the build I wanted to discuss today. So, actually, the second build that I presented, so this Essence River one, was the one used in the LCS for the most of the time in the first week. But then someone discovered that actually, Varus is not only strong in the lane phase thanks to the passive, but his poke is much stronger if you build Lethality. This was still on patch 7.1, where Lethality was actually quite weak still. Now it became much stronger, but Varus remains a very, very strong champion. So what we have right here is this idea that you go from Tyr into Serrated Dirk. This gives you very nice lane power, so you may want to get boots in between those items, of course. But the first 2 things, so you go for Tyr, you probably on the first back have enough money for 2 longswords or a longsword and boots. And from that point, you can basically just go for either Muramana, which means that you'll get your Manamune. No, you go for Manamune and then you get your Muramana very soon into the game. Or you have another option of going for Yomu's Ghostblade, which is a very strong item since it basically doubles your lethality. And then you go for Manamune. Right? So that's the basic point of the build. After you have those 2 items completed, it's time to get your second tier boots. So Lucidity boots are really strong with this build, just because it's additional CDR on summoner spells and additional CDR on your abilities. And yeah, basically that's your core build. With those 3 items, with Lucidity boots, with Yomu's Ghostblade, and with Muramana, you're actually a very, very potent fighter. And that's basically the breaking point for the build, because from here you have to decide. It's not so easy because there are quite a few items you may want to get. I normally start with the second Serrated Dirk just for the bonus lethality, because it just gives you so much, right? And from the Serrated Dirk, you can go for Edge of the Night. That's probably an optimal choice because there's quite a lot of CC or abilities flying around. Because you'll be in the mid game by then, right? So you'll be probably willing to get some defensive items. And Edge of the Night has been buffed recently. It's very strong, very potent. Gives you lethality as well. Gives you a little bit of MR. So that's just a very strong item. Last Whisper is another consideration just because, that's some more poke damage. If you go for Lord Dominic's Regards, of course. You may want to go for the Mortal Reminder if they have a healer. But I would say that Lord Dominic's is superior here because you can even poke the tanks with this item. You do not always want to get this item, of course, because you have some other options. You can see that those are the basic four items, right? So Edge of the Night, Manamune, Yomu's Ghostblade, and Boots of Lucidity. And from there you actually decide, right? Duskblade for even more lethality, so if they don't have any tanks, you go for Duskblade. That's number 5. And then you can finish the build off with perhaps either Black Cleaver or a Dev's Dance, that's additional 10% CDR. You can finish it with Black Cleaver, that's capped CDR. And moreover, you get some bonus HP as well, so more survivability. You can go for Mercurial Scimitar as well, because that's just a very, very nice item for dealing with CC. So that's basically it. That's it for the build. Okay, so for the Masters, I take the standard AD carry page. This is something that takes time getting used to because you do not have the Cunning tree, so you do not get Savagery from here, so your CSing might get hurt initially before you get used to, having 5 less damage. So this is basically a very traditional tree, right? You go for Ferocity, Since you have a lot of sustain from Warlord's Bloodlust and Vampirism, you can probably skip Feast. Get some bonus damage from Fresh Blood, because that's just a very, very strong passive. Initially, like for the first part of the lane phase. Now you have another choice here. You can go for Double-Edged Sword to facilitate early trades and to make snowballing the lane a bit easier, but I think you can just manage without it as well, and you can just go for Bounty Hunter. That's a bit greedy, of course, but I think that's more optimal for like mid-late game poke. And then you go for Resolve Tree. So those are like some very nice masteries. Recovery gives you health regen per second. That's very nice for an AD carry, because you keep trading, and that's something that will provide you some bonus health. It will keep you topped up all the time. Then you go for Tough Skin. That's just some damage reduction as well. That's a very nice passive. Then here we have a choice depending on what you're laning with. You can go for Runic Armor if you have like a Janna or Nami, Soraka, Ivern in the jungle. This is a very good passive then. If not, you can just go for bonus health. That's something that will again keep your enemies surprised. And the most important part here is the Insight Mastery, which gives you 15% cooldown on summoner spells, which kind of prevents AD carry in 2K17 from happening too often, right? You can flash more often, you can heal more often. That's just something that will also throw your enemies off balance a bit if they are actually counting your cooldowns, because that's minus 15%, Lucidity is another minus 15%. This gives you a lot of cooldown on your flash and your heal that people not really anticipate, right? So that's something that keeps you more mobile. And mobility is crucial because Varus has no escapes, right? Other than you can use the ult and flash. That's basically everything you have. So that probably wraps it up for the masteries. Let's go through the basic pros and cons of the caster Varus build, so the tier into Ghostblade build. So there are a few really strong things about Varus. So you have a very strong lane phase no matter which build you choose. There are really no weak matchups for you. If you play correctly, you can win versus Jhin, you can win versus Caitlyn. You just need to know how to pressure the lane well. You need to have a decent support, of course. But that's not something that will really matter that much later on in the game. So you have a really strong lane phase. Then you snowball the reset champions very well. When you have a Katarina, when you have a Kha'Zix, for instance, when you have an Akali, and you poke the enemy down, it's very easy for those assassins to execute them and move on to the next target. So I think Varus is really well, combos really very well with Katarina, with Akali mostly, just because of those huge Q damage spikes that can get your enemies to low HP and that facilitate the dives. Then you also have the ultimate, so your team fighting is really strong in the mid game. So generally you have powerful mid game and early late game because of that. So you have a lot of control that other ADCs don't. You have a lot of poke, which Ashe doesn't have because she has control. So yeah, you just can get the game out of control very easily thanks to this. You can just snowball it very quickly. You can get your team going. You do not really need to finish stacking the mana immune either. You can see here in my OPGG, that's not the best part. You can see here that I haven't really finished my mana immune in most of my games, and those are like 30-minute games actually. It's because you don't really want to spam your skills just to stack it. You use mana immune mostly as this additional mana reserve that you need for poke, and that's basically it. Another really nice thing about Varus is the low CD on flash or on summoner spells in general. Just because you have Ionian Boots of Lucidity, you have the Mastery that gives you additional summoner spell cooldown reduction. So this basically means that you're just free to run around, right? You can flash very often. People will not be able to time your flash correctly unless they take into consideration all those factors, right? So you're actually quite a mobile Varus, let's say, because you're not a mobile AD carry, of course, but you get some additional mobility. You get less of ADC in 2017 than other ADCs would. So that's very nice. And the final point that is a strong thing about Varus is that he has extremely potent poke. You have 5 seconds cooldown level 9 with 20% CDR on your Q, and this also means that you poke for about 700 at that point, with 3 items, which is just ridiculous and which will get your enemies on their knees. they just won't be able to do a thing against you most of the time, if you can actually hit your skill shots, that is. As far as the late game goes, that's your biggest con, really, because you just don't offer as much as other AD carries. You just don't have this attack speed, you don't have the critical chance, your sustained damage output is quite low, so you have to wait for poke. If enemy has like Ocean Dragons, for instance, if they have high sustained champions like Soraka, like Janna, like Sona, you will just get outscaled and you won't be able to do that much, right? So you really want to get an advantage, you want to push it early, and you want to finish the game pre-35-minute mark. Otherwise, you're going to have bad time, that's it. And you're not that mobile, right? Varus has no escapes. You have flash, you have ultimate, that's it. So if you get caught, you die most of the time. Unless you keep really good timing on your flash. You try not to engage fights when you have your flash down. This should probably keep you alive much longer. So yeah, that's basically it. Okay, so I wanted to show you my results of the build. So I'm currently Platinum 2, this hasn't refreshed yet. Here we go, Platinum 2. And this build has been actually proving to be extremely useful. You can see that my win rate on Varus is 74% right now, so it's slowly climbing up, with a very decent KDA as well. My kill contribution is mediocre, but that's because Varus is just this poke champion, so normally you poke and then somebody else gets the kills, like an assassin, like a Katarina for instance, right? That's not always the case. You can also like snipe people, but that's the major point of the build. You are just sniping people from the distance. This means that, as you can see, you have like very nice KDA most of the time. I mean, I've been winning most of my games when I was behind, even when I lost my lane sometimes, when I got ganked a lot. You can see that my damage was actually very high anyway, so that's just a very, very strong thing about Varus. Right, you can see the damage here, 36,000 damage compared to the rest of the team or enemies. That's just super, super impressive for a champion that is an AD carry, right? Normally ADC, and mind you, those games mostly ended in the mid game. So that's just a very, very strong point of picking Varus as a caster, right? You can see again, top of the chart as far as the damage goes, despite the Fed Akali. So this is because you have very high presence in the lane and very high presence in the mid and late game. It does actually, I mean, your presence in the game does actually weaken by the late game, because that's where those hyper carry ADCs will actually hit their full power spike in the late game with 5-6 items. You're not going to hit it for as much damage as they do, because their auto attacks will be hitting as much as your Qs, and they can just auto attack like twice a second. So that's not something to be underestimated. If you have an advantage, try to force your team to push it and to finish the game as soon as you can, right? So it's possible to just poke people down, just go to the mid lane, right? Poke people down, take the turrets, go top lane, do the same thing. Around objectives, you're also a very strong champion. Like you're really always an asset to your team throughout the early and mid game, and then in the late game you fall off a little bit. Doesn't mean you're completely useless, because you still have your ultimate, you have the poke. So if you can play, you can position well, you can make some aggressive plays maybe when the team fights go crazy, then you're not going to be weak late game anyway. So let's move to some gameplay, because that's something I really wanted to share. Okay, so here we go, that's the starting phase of the game. We have the lane phase going on for us. So the first thing you want to do is to push the wave on the first one, because that's what's going to give you control initially through the lane phase, right? You can see that like every single trade the enemy takes, you're going to overpower them with your bonus attack speed that you get from the passive. It starts with, okay, it doesn't show here in the preview, but it's quite a lot. I think it's about 30%, 25-30% for the beginning of the lane phase. So you can just try getting auto attacks on your opponent as often as you can. You should be careful with your mana, mind you, because you don't have the tier yet, so you don't want to exhaust all your resources initially. Right? I didn't flash here, I didn't really want to go too greedy, I wasn't sure if I would kill the guy or not. He had enough HP to survive 2 auto attacks. But generally speaking, you can see here that like Varus' early lane phase is really strong. If you have a support that plays aggressive, you can really, really suppress your opponents. Depending on the champions, of course, right? Caitlyn is going to push in, so you have to keep that in mind. Play accordingly. You have to just learn all the matchups, right? But most of the time, you can just push in the wave, together with your support for the first 3 waves, let's say, get as much poke as you can, you know, just pressure the enemy into losing the CS. You can see here it's not so much, like 15 to 10. I'm not CSing too well here, let's face it, right? When you have to, you know, share your attention between poking and CSing, you may fail from time to time. But you can see here that you basically push the minions to the turret, you can poke them again. They have very little time to respond to anything you do. And this basically wraps up the first phase of the game. We can move to the first back. Fast forward a little bit. You can see that my first buy was just the tier. That's because I didn't have enough gold for tier and longsword, but we forced Twitch out of the lane very early, so he only has the call. And so it goes, right? We can just poke them as much as we can. There's a gank coming in, we kill the Twitch. That's very simple, very quick. But generally what you want to do in the lane phase is just poke as much as you can, because with the tier you can just Q all the time. You're not really going to, you know, run out of mana anytime soon. Just don't use the E unless you get the opportunity to slow them with E, and then just guarantee that you hit the Q. Right, so you just keep spamming your Q whenever they are in range, and this basically is what the lane phase is going to look like for you. You can see Twitch comes to the lane, we just poke him as much as we can. Right, he eats all the skills just basically. We chase him down. I think it's going to be at least, yeah, we force the heal. So we force the heal, we force the guy out of the lane, they try to gank us, they kill the Vel'Koz. But that's again not a big issue, right? Because we have the pressure anyway. The Vel'Koz is going to come back to the lane, and we're just going to do just fine. So the goal for the lane phase is just to poke them as much as you can, CS as well as you can, and just try to scale towards the first major buy, which is going to be the Dirk. So just fast forward through this thing. You can see that I just shove in the waves, I go back, I go greedy for one more wave actually. I back off. You can see that I start with Serrated Dirk and the Longsword. That's a very nice shop. And that's where you're actually going to get really, really incredibly strong. Okay, that was a bit too quick. Okay, so the deal with Serrated Dirk is that you overpower your opponent with the poke and with the damage. Just because you have the bonus attack speed from the passive, you have the bonus AD, you have the bonus lethality, you're ahead of any AD carry that buys BF sword or attack speed on their first shop. So you can actually win most of the all-ins, right? Just with the ult, just with the damage you have, it's just really, really strong. And the first skill that you get is going to propel you into, you know, this extremely high attack speed right now. So then you can just push the lane in and go back to base, right? So this is basically the breaking point of every matchup with Varus. You have your level 6, you have your Serrated Dirk, you have your Muramana, you poke before the fight, then you all in them, and you should be able to win the trade, you know, get summoners or get kills, get the turret, get the pressure, get more CS advantage, and just really snowball the game. That's basically the idea here. Now we can just skip to the next phase. Right, so that's the mid-game phase. What you want to do in the mid-game is you just go mid-lane. You go mid-lane and you try to take the tower. Sometimes, if your lane goes very, very well and the enemy turret is, you know, maybe your enemy top laner is actually winning with your top lane, and then you may want to actually go top lane to just switch with your top lane and give them some relief because your lane is already won. They might just get some CS and XP while you take another tower. You can go mid lane as well, but that's just generally all about the poke you get, right? So you try to go to various lanes, just get as much poke as you can, get more pressure, get more turrets, get more objectives. So as Varus, you really want to... You can see how much damage the Lux took here, right? It was like 1/3 of her health. Again, one more Q. She's down to 25% HP, so that's just incredibly huge for the mid game. And that's what you're aiming to do, as you can see here, right? We're taking the mid lane turret, now we get a bit distracted, I flash, I miss, and the Twitch is probably going to live through this. I don't think I can catch him here. I think I can hit the Q. No. So they get away with this. We actually shouldn't have done this. We should have taken the turret. But Riven is here. We take another tower here. We get some more pressure on the map. You can see we killed Teemo as well. Like, Varus provides you with so much damage output throughout the mid-late game, throughout this mid-game, early mid-game, and like early late game as well. So you can see that we basically stripped the enemy base of all the turrets within 17 minutes. The only auto remaining is that isn't the top lane right now. We still push into their base because they have 3 people dead, and we have so much poke potential still that, yeah, we do overextend here a little bit, I think, but that's not a big issue. The Twitch also dies again here. So yeah, that's the mid game, people. That's the mid game. You can see how potent Varus is, and the important thing to notice is that this is where you should be ending your game. You should be getting the Baron around the 20th minute if your team has the advantage. You should be really trying hard, because if you don't, then something like this might happen, and that's not pretty, mind you. That's not pretty at all. So we jump to the beginning of the late game here. There's 27 minutes, so we're like late mid game already here. And we still have this very significant advantage. You can see 14,000 gold. But this game actually got out of hand very easily, because our jungle was not that great. We got our Baron stolen from the... like, basically from in front of us, because Riven had no smite. For some reason. And this game snowballed out of control for the enemy team. We have 13,000 gold advantage, but we were on the brink of losing the game here. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit, but generally speaking, you have to remember that you are not that strong anymore. When the late game starts, you really want to be closing out the game at that point. You want to have this Baron Nashor, you want to be able to just walk through their base, get the Nexus, and finish the game. Because if the game drags out, you get to the point where your poke doesn't matter that much anymore. Because people get out of sustain, right? There are some objectives that you have to be careful about as well. So, for instance, Ocean Drakes, which do give the enemy team some sustain in the lane, so they can defend their turrets more efficiently, right? But yeah, if the game drags out, you get into this, you can say, chaos, right? Because you can't really influence what your teammates do. So we have those small skirmishes all the time, and what happens here is that you may basically try to yeah, you may end up losing the game. Because those small skirmishes just keep happening, right? And if your team isn't like coordinated well enough, even with like, you could see 15,000 gold advantage, you can still lose. This game just got out of control because of the Baron that we lost, right? But the games just, if they drag out until 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, it's a roulette. And Varus is not really that lacking this roulette game because, you know, you don't have attack speed, you don't have crits, so you do not shred through the melee front line of the enemy team that quickly. And if those organized 5v5 teamfights actually happen, yeah, you're screwed. I mean, you're not screwed, but you're in a very bad position anyway. So that's something you have to keep in mind all the time. When the enemy team does drag the game into the late game, you are really in the bad position. You can see here that, like, basically the whole team is just running around the map, skirmishing all the time. And that's not what Varus wants to do, right? Varus wants to be grouped as 5v5 and just poke, get the turrets, get the inhibitors, finish the game as soon as possible. So 30 minutes is the point where you should be, you know, on the brink of ending the game.